George looks forward to celebrating his Golden Jubilee in a few months' time. But this walk turns out to be his last.
He was killed by somebody in Salonika, by a man. They thought it was an anarchist, but it was only a madman who just got out when he passed next to a cafe and shot him in the back.
I met a Russian princess. She told me that she was in the room in the palace in Athens when an aide walked in and said, "Your Majesty, your husband the king has been assassinated." And I asked her, how did my grandmother react? And in her typical heavy Russian accent, "Oh, my dear boy, she just got up and threw up."
Greece has more than doubled in size during King George's 50-year reign, and the size of the population has increased dramatically too. Yet from this point, the role of King of Greece becomes a very insecure position. George is buried, and his son will now rule Greece as King Constantine I. As conquering commander, Constantine is adored by the Greek people.
Then the First World War started, and there were intrigues, and they accused him of being pro-German because he had married the Princess of Prussia. And then he became the most hated person in Greece.
Both the Germans and the Allies are putting pressure on Constantine to enter the war on their respective sides. And by declaring Greek neutrality, he manages to disappoint and upset all sides in the war. In 1917, the Allies demand that Constantine abdicate and go into exile. He may choose his successor, but is told it can't be his eldest son, George, who is also seen as pro-German.
There were 3 boys, and I think it's one of the rare occasions in history where all 3 became king.
The first choice is the second son, 24-year-old Prince Alexander, who has been driven to despair by the situation.
The whole family had been kicked out, but Alexander, he was lonely, surrounded by enemies of his family.
Alexander is nothing but a puppet king, and Greece now enters the war on the Allied side. After the First World War, Alexander marries the 21-year-old commoner, Aspasia Manos.
That was very good she was not royal. It was about time you had some blood to mix in and make things a bit more, shall we say, human.
Aspasia becomes pregnant, but after less than a year of happy marriage, a tragic accident befalls Alexander.
He went for a walk in the garden of the property where he lived, and his favorite dog was attacked by a monkey.
And in separating the fight, the monkey bit him, and blood poisoning ensued.
There was nobody who had the courage to cut the king's leg off. There was no penicillin in those days, and he died of gangrene, really.
Alexander is buried in Athens. His daughter, Alexandra, who was born after her father's death, will later marry the king of Yugoslavia. Through the process of a referendum, the Greeks decide that Alexander's father, Constantine I, should return to the throne. Constantine returns to a country that is at war with Turkey. And 18 months later, the Turks destroy his army, and over 250,000 Greeks lose their lives when Smyrna is obliterated.
Because of the defeat and the burn and the disaster of Smyrna, again the public opinion turned against him, saying he's responsible for that. So they kicked him out for the second time.
Constantine's brother, Prince Andrew, as well as 5 ministers, are also held responsible and are imprisoned. The ministers are all executed, But with a death threat hanging over him, Andrew manages to flee the country, together with his wife and their little boy, Philippos. Many years later, the boy will become known as Prince Philip, consort to Queen Elizabeth II of Great Britain. Constantine is a broken man, and he dies in Italy just months after being forced into exile for a second time. His despairing Sophie moves into a villa near Florence, a villa which for many years to come will function as the exiled family's only fixed point of reference. Constantine's son, George, is now proclaimed the new king. Yet in the first instance, George is only able to call himself King George II for a period of a year. Then he too is sent into exile, and Greece is proclaimed a republic. In the 11 years that Greece is a republic, the country witnesses a total of 23 governments, 13 coups, and 1 dictator. In 1935, the Greek people vote to re-establish the monarchy. And George II returns home to Athens. As George has no heir, his younger brother, Paul, is now crown prince. In 1936, Paul proposes to Kaiser Wilhelm's granddaughter, Frederica of Hanover. Like her husband-to-be, Frederica is also a descendant of the father-in-law of Europe. The couple marry in Athens, and the pair, who are second cousins, very quickly achieve a high degree of popularity. The following years see the arrival of their 3 children, Sophia, Constantine, and Irene.
My father became king on the 1st of April, 1947, when his elder brother, King George II, died.
At the funeral, the mourners will have to follow the coffin for many miles, and the family has its doubts as to whether the 6-year-old Constantine will be able to last the distance.
My father took me for a very long walk, which lasted for 2-3 hours, over the hills, just to see if I could actually walk with him in the funeral. And during the funeral, I still remember in my mind, I wanted to see if men could cry. So I was looking into the crowd to see if men could cry, and I was very, very impressed to see men weeping.
King Paul is now the 3rd brother to sit on the throne, and the Greeks are delighted with their new king. King Paul sends his uncle Goggi and Aunt Marie to represent him at the coronation of Queen Elizabeth in London. Princess Marie, who during the Nazi occupation of Austria had smuggled her teacher Freud out of the country, is now in attendance as the official Greek representative.
She hated that kind of pomp. She was bored to death. So she seated in the stalls with tiara, decoration, everything. She couldn't care less. So she turned to her neighbor and said, "Would you like me to psychoanalyze you during the coronation?" So the gentleman, a bit amazed, said, "Why not?" So she started asking questions, and he started talking and talking. They didn't see one thing of the coronation, of course. The gentleman next to her was François Mitterrand, future president of France.
Greece's economy is in a poor state, so Queen Frederica organizes a luxury cruise to encourage tourism, and by inviting Europe's nobility, she hopes to ensure that Greece will receive a lot of media coverage.
We were about 300 cousins, uncles on that boat. It was great fun. It was also hoped.